All right, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy Will Weir, joined by Adam Taylor. And Adam's got something on his mind today that we want to dive into, and that's should the Celtics upgrade from Luke Kornet? Let's talk about it. Let's do it all here on Green with Envy. What's going on, everybody? We got Will Weir in the building here, and I am joined by my podcasting cousin from across the pond. We got Adam Taylor in the house. Adam, how you doing today, man?
I am good, man. I am good. I've got sounds playing in the background still, and I don't know where they're coming from. Oh, it's coming from Instagram. Bear with me. So Instagram's
So
just
some
got.
technical difficulties happening here as we go live here for this Green with Envy quick hit special.
Yeah, so my apologies. So this is the first time I'm trying to do this live with Instagram at the same time. I didn't realize that I had to wait for a hot minute while it all went together. It messed me up. I do apologize, but I do have some on my mind. I do. I have Luke Kornet on the mind. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Not
man.
money on the mind, but Luke Kornet on the mind.
Got Luke Kornet, got mortgages on the mind, but no, let's talk about it. So, for those of y'all that haven't listened to the podcast that we dropped today, yesterday, myself and Greg, we got together and we answered some fan base questions from both Twitter and from the Discord. Once again, if you're saying what Discord, well, then you're slow to the kick. Let's go, baby. Come on, get into the Discord. We got the link for you in our YouTube description, in all of our descriptions for the podcast on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen. Make sure you join and sign up. We answered some of those questions yesterday, and a lot of them kind of beat around the bush talking about what we want to talk about today, which is going to be our guy, Luke Kornet. Luke Kornet as the third big for the Celtics. The question that Adam and I are going to look at today, should the Celtics upgrade from Luke Kornet as December 15th really kind of opens up trade season, which will be tomorrow when a lot of guys who were signed in the offseason start to become eligible. There's another batch on January 15th that will happen as well. So trade season is upon us. So with that, Adam, what's on your mind?
Yeah, so I've just seen a lot of people talking about we need a big, and I feel like you had Kristaps Porzingis, you've still got Al Horford, who's playing out of his mind for his age, right? Yet the big man narrative is still kind of just there, right? And I understand some people just aren't that into having Luke Kornet as that third big. And you know, if you're not happy with something, you can always find reasons to point out what they're doing wrong rather than looking at the bigger picture. So I just wanted to have the discussion with you. You know, if anybody's watching live and they want to get involved in the chats, then they can, and we can definitely take their opinions on board and kind of look at it through their lens as well. But I just want to look at whether or not Luke Kornet is doing what is needed of him as that third big in the rotation. Because for me personally, and I'll start this off telling the truth, I think he's been doing absolutely fine.
Yeah. Yeah, he's been great lately too, right? I think that's a big. I think at the beginning of the season, he started off a little bit shaky, but he's really solidified himself as a guy that Missoula's going to in the rotation. So I think for me, Adam, this comes down to kind of two different pieces of the conversation that we need to look at. I think when we look at what is Luke's responsibility right now with this team as presently constituted, if they're fully healthy, he is more than capable and suitable for the job. And what his job is probably about 8 to 12 minutes per night with a healthy roster. And if there's a night where, Kristaps or Al is out, being elevated to probably somewhere around that 15 to 18 minute mark, somewhere in that range. And I think for the regular season, that is totally fine. And I'm on board. The only question for me, and this is where I think some fans lean into with do we need to upgrade Luke Kornet, is that when you look at the Celtics roster, you mentioned Al's been incredible. He's 37 years old. If besides LeBron, there's no one else that's an elder statesman in the game that's playing as well as Al Horford. So Al Horford is above and beyond, and you just never really know, with 37, anything can happen, right? Like he's had great injury history, has not had an injury history to speak of over the last several years. But the older you get, you're one injury away from just never really bouncing back to being that guy that you are. So you have to always have kind of a plan B. And then you have Kristaps Porzingis, and this is kind of timely, right? We're recording this before the Cavs and Celtics play tonight. And, he's back on the injury report with some more calf tightness. Don't know if that's necessarily related to, the couple of games that he sat out about a week or two ago, but it's something you got to keep an eye on, right? And so with Kristaps, we know the history. And so I think for me, when I look at Luke, as I said, presently constituted, 2 thumbs up. I think he's doing a great job, and I think he's playing very well. However, if we do get to a scenario in which he needs to be elevated out of that position, that's when I get a little bit worried. So if we're talking about the present moment, Adam, I'm with you. 0 problems with our guy, Luke Kornet.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. I think that when you've got the injury problems, he brings the size, he brings the rim protection. He's never going to be a guy that's going to drop you 15 to 20 on a nightly.
Mm-hmm.
He's never going to pull down 8 to 12 boards on a nightly. He's going to be that guy that comes in, is a willing screener, knows where to kind of go in terms of positioning. He's not really a dunker spot guy. He is there now and again, but he's not always there as a dunker spot guy. Instead, he's more of a, hey, let me screen, let me roll, let me kind of just be where I need to be around the rim. Some good vertical spacing because of the threat. They do utilize him a little bit as a lob threat. And he's a team player, right? Like he doesn't care if he plays 8 minutes one night, 15 the next, if he gets a DMP CD.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. Now, on the flip side of that, I think you can argue that his defensive upside is very limited. Right. So by that, what I mean is he's a good pick and roll defender. Brad Stevens has said so himself. I trust Brad to know far more than I ever will. I think the Kornet contest, I see the logic behind that. But in terms of like physicality,
I hate it for the record, but I get it. I see the logic. I hate it, but I see the logic.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm a fan. I see the logic. It take line of sight, right? We're removing the line of sight. I think for me, the problem that I have is the physicality side of things. When Luke's there as a third big in the rotation, like you can get away with that. He's playing backup minutes against backup bigs. On games like coming into the game today, right? So coming up against the Cavs, there's a chance Porzingis doesn't play. There's a chance Jaylen Brown doesn't play. If one of those guys is out, we're most likely going to see Al Horford slide into the starting 5. We're going to see a double big. If both of them are out, then obviously either way, one of those two or both of those guys go out, Luke Kornet slides up a spot. And now he's playing more minutes and you're relying on him to still be a good rim protector, a good drop defender. And there's a little bit of, well, we can attack Kornet off the dribble. We can attack that lead hip. We can play physically with him because he just doesn't have that low center of gravity or those sturdy legs. And then that's where my concerns come in, right? That's when I'm like, well, maybe having another option isn't the worst thing in the world, but I don't think I'd be willing to give up assets to go and get that option.
So that's the next part, right? I think we're both in agreement, right? If this team's fully healthy, Luke is a more than capable third big. Is that fair to say that we're both in agreement there?
Yeah, more than capable. Fully healthy, more than capable.
So then it becomes, then this is the thing. Like Michael Pena just put out an article on The Ringer, right, where he was going through some fake trades, and he mentioned, John Conchar, which is a name that has been rumored. I think 2-3 weeks ago it came up in an article that, that's a guy the Celtics could be looking at. And really what it starts to come down to is the Celtics have very limited resources as to how they're going to make improvements, whether it's from the big side of things, whether it's adding a wing, whether that's adding guard depth. The Celtics are going to be very limited, have to play within a window of basically, $10 million or less, whether that's using salaries or that's using the Grant Williams TPE, which is somewhere over, I think, a little north of $6 million or so. And then they have some second round picks, but that's the window that you're kind of working in, right? So then you got to kind of figure out what is the best way to spend those assets because you are so limited. And that's where you got to start to, parse out a little bit. Is it John Conchar? Is it, you and I did a podcast about 2-3 weeks ago, Xavier Tillman, Andre Drummond, who are the names that are going to fit in there? Alex Caruso's a big time, that's really going for it. If you're going to put your assets in that basket, which, from a talent standpoint in a vacuum, out of the couple of names we've mentioned, that's probably the best player that we've mentioned. But the asset that you got to use to get whatever it is that you're going to bring in, like Brad Stevens has to be very careful because it's a limited window. And then starting next season, it's going to be even tougher to team build because they're going to be in that second tax apron team. And a lot more of those, CBA provisions are going to start to kick in.
And this is my issue, right? Like, if you spend those assets now, it makes sense, right? In a vacuum, it makes sense. Try and get as much as I don't want to call him a core piece, and I don't want to call him a peripheral piece either. Just kind of get
somewhere in the middle of that. That's fair.
Get as much structure in this roster as you can, tied down for as long as you can before the entirety of the new CBA kicks in and all of those punitive seconds. Like, you're going to be in the second apron regardless of what happens with Luke Kornet. So if you feel like, hey, we could make a move now for a guy that's got two years plus a player option on his deal, who's likely to pick up that player option, and he's going to be an upgrade over Luke, then do that, because that makes sense in terms of roster construction. But don't go and make a move now to kind of upgrade from Luke when he hasn't given you a reason to really need to make that upgrade. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I like the idea of a Drummond. I like an Andre Drummond type, just somebody you can put into the game, doesn't really have a great basketball IQ, isn't really much of a defensive presence, but he's physical and he can match certain teams' physicalities, and it gives you that dimension for when you're playing the Miamis, the Orlandos, these type of teams. But if he's only got a year on his deal or 2 years on his deal, and Luke Kornet is cheaper, you get to keep the assets you'd have to give up to bring Drummond in, and the upgrade is marginal at best, that to me is not a deal worth doing. Right.
I mean, I think Drummond would be pretty cheap. I mean, I'm not as into the idea of Drummond as you are. I just, in the playoffs, I know that there's going to be series where physicality will matter. I just, because for me, I think about, once again, if Drummond's in that role of KP or Al goes out for a little bit of period in the playoffs, I'm not going to feel comfortable with Drummond out there for 15 to 20.
No, and you're not meant to, right? You're not meant to feel comfortable,
right?
With
and you're not going to with Luke either. Is I think is kind of the point, right? Although I'll be honest, I'd feel more comfortable with Luke for 15 to 20 than I probably would with Drummond, despite that physicality. For me, I think if you're really looking at an upgrade, and Greg and I touched on this the other day, I just, it's not necessarily to me about one specific skill set. You're not going to get a super multi-skilled guy, but it's a little bit of versatility, right? It's someone that can help you play different ways, whether that's, a guy that can, like you said, be a little bit more physical. I think the Celtics are kind of missing a small ball 5 option. That's something that I think they need to look into a little bit, is that there's going to be, this is where I think this is the Grant Williams piece that's missing. And that's why I look at a guy like Xavier Tillman, where I think and I'm curious to watch as they play the Magic on Friday and Sunday. Like, that's a series where I think, the Magic are really long, but at times they're just physical. And so I think maybe even a Tillman type might be somebody who can give you some physicality, a little bit more physicality across the board. He's a bit more ground bound, but he's going to put his body into them and use his own size against the length that maybe isn't quite as girthy as a guy like Tillman. You don't have that Grant type anymore. So I think for me, regardless of who the name is, it's a little bit of versatility that if they need to step up, they can play with KP or Al, and they give us kind of another curveball when they're both healthy that we can go to, that we don't really have right now. Because at the end of the day, once you get to the playoffs, it's going to be about matchups. And so it's, how can you respond to whatever the other team is doing? Can you throw them off their game? Can you answer whatever they throw at you? And I think the Celtics could use a little bit more versatility in the front court.
Yeah, and I like Tillman a lot. I think that he makes a ton of sense. One thing I'm very big on is upgrading doesn't mean getting somebody that does what Al and what Porzingis do, but a lighter version. Because you're not upgrading, then you're just mimicking what you've already got on the roster. You need that difference, that differentiator where, like, Tillman's in the game, we can play a bit more physical. He can, Tillman can shoot the free a little bit. He's got some size. He can give you some short rolls, like he's done puffs and stuff. I'm not saying he's going to be a short roll creator, but having that different look is definitely something that's missing right now. I feel like Kornet is Kristaps light. He doesn't shoot the free. He's still quite
Potentially
nimble.
could. Like we said, he used to be a shooter.
Yeah, I mean, he used to, right? But like he gives you a lot of the same things of what you're getting off Horford and Porzingis, just not at the same level. And I understand that in a way because everything's replicable, right? One guy comes out, you put the next guy in, it's plug and play. Everybody plays a similar way. We keep the system the same, the structure's the same. For me, that's all well and good. But having somebody that comes in and literally changes the dynamic of how it's going, and Grant used to do that a lot. Because sometimes he'd just go rogue. Sometimes you put him in the corner, he'd be like, "Nah, fuck that. Let me drive baseline." And he was never meant to be driving baseline, but he's like, "Yeah, I'm Grant Williams. I'm sturdy as shit. People can bounce off me." I'd like that in Tillman. I've said to you before, if it's not Tillman, I wouldn't mind Kenny Lofton for similar reasons.
Yeah, I mean the Grizz. We talked about this. The Grizz have a stable of those type of guys.
Yeah,
but one thing I do want to emphasize is like Luke has been playing very well, right? So I think there does need to be, the thing with Luke that he would give you if you just choose to remain with Luke. He gives you that stability, and he's a really smart player. So I do think there is something to be said for having a guy that doesn't rock the boat as well, because he's very familiar playing with all of the guys that are currently on the Celtics. And I know both you and Greg both highlighted kind of the white boy stack as as Greg deemed it, where Luke's a part of that, right? Between Luke, Sam, and Pritchard, the white boy stack off the bench, like they're getting the job done.
Plus one boys last season, white boy stack this season. And I'm not like, how can I put this? I like Luke, and I think whenever you need to rely on a third string guy, regardless of what position he plays, regardless of who he is, if you're relying on him, something went wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Something somewhere has gone horribly wrong, and everything else, it doesn't matter because your third string guy is playing 15, 18, 19 minutes a game. Who else is going to come in and change that, right?
If KP and Al go down for a long stretch in a big moment, meaning end of the season playoffs, like we're going to be in
6 weeks. Yeah,
it's going to be tough. You're going to have to scrap by, right? And so it's going to be a tough spot, regardless of if it's Luke or it's somebody else that they trade for in that spot. It's going to be a really difficult predicament for the Celtics, but it's just trying to give yourself enough options, right? In case of emergency. And so I do think going to get one more big guy, hopefully keeping Luke and getting one more big guy that gives you just another option, I would definitely be in for that. But I think once again, it's going to come down to that asset conversation that we started.
And what about Quater?
I mean, the thing for me, and I said this with Greg yesterday,
we're going to piss some people off right now, by the way.
Well, I mean, it's the thing for me is like I got really excited that night that he came in and had a bunch of offensive rebounds. Like that was really fun. It was, and I think he does give he's so big, right? He does give a different presence at the rim, both offensively and defensively, but he's so raw. And it seems clear to me that, while you had that stretch with Porzingis out, he got one look. He would have got more looks at this point, right? I think when we rest KP, when we rest Al, like he would have gotten more looks if they felt like they wanted to start developing him to potentially be a guy that by the time you get to post-trade deadline could be called upon. I think we would have seen a little bit more of them leaning into it at this point. So for me, I'm kind of just inferring that they don't view him as a guy that's going to be able to do that this year. He's a continued project that they're going to work on in the background. He'll get a spot chance here and there, but I don't think, based on what I'm seeing on the court and the rotations and the opportunities, that they're going to put him into enough spots that they think that he's somebody that could be, equal to Luke Kornet as like a third or fourth big.
Yeah, and I don't mean this is going to come across very condescending towards him, and I don't mean it to be. It's just the way I kind of compartmentalized him. He's the excitable puppy in the rotation. Like when he comes in, energy just slaps you in the face, right? He's up and down the floor. He's in everyone's grill. He's jumping for rebounds. The downside to that, you foul a lot. You bite on pump fakes a ton. You mess up in terms of maybe you rush an action and your handoff goes awry, or I used awry in a sentence instead of writing. But I mean, there's pros and cons to coming with that level of jitteriness.
I think Brissett and Stevens are a little bit on the like a wing version of that as well too, and that's why we haven't seen either of them get consistent run this year. It's just
jittery. It's like, you remember the other day when we did an episode with Greg, and he was like, "I've had loads of coffee and I don't know what I'm about to say, but I'm about." Like that's Stevens, Brissett.
That's that trio every day.
Yeah, just like, dude, I think Jimmy Butler's coffee company makes its living off of those three, and it's his like ingenious mastermind plan to bring the Celtics down from the inside. Right? These
He's
are my
infiltrated them.
yeah, Big Head Coffee, Big Head because it's just is it Big Head Coffee?
I think it's Big Face Coffee.
Big face, it doesn't matter. Same shit, you know what I mean? Big
Yeah.
face means big brain. He's just caffeinating all these dudes up and they're all jittery. Jokes aside, though, I do think that Crater is another guy that just brings too much energy. He hasn't learned to calm down. He hasn't learned to let the game kind of come to him. He wants to be that. He wants to come in and make an impression. And that's good.
Yeah.
But it's not good when you're a contending team that needs everybody to be on the same page and executing at a certain level. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's
he's
what
an interesting
Kornet gives you.
project. He's an interesting project. I hope they continue with him. I hope we get to see him a little bit more and evaluate him in real game situations, especially on the nights where, like, potentially tonight might be where, you know, Kristaps is out or it's a back-to-back. So at least one of these two nights, I'm sure we're going to be without Kristaps or Al Horford, you know, just from a rest standpoint, or both at one point. So, you know, it'd be interesting to see if he gets in either tonight against the Cavs or tomorrow against the Magic. But yeah, I think the Celtics will monitor the market to kind of put a bow on this. I think the Celtics are going to monitor the market. I think right now, to your point, there's no real urgency to be like, we got to go make a move right now. And so you're in a pretty nice position where you're sitting back, you're seeing what starts to happen with the Bulls, what happens with the Grizzlies, what happens with, you know, there might be guys that we're not even thinking about from maybe the Raptors, or, you know, there's, you know, the Pacers are involved in trade talks. There's a lot of guys that could end up moving around that completely shift the dynamics of who we're talking about is available. That won't be for another month or two.
So I was on a podcast with S a few weeks back, and the one name he threw out there, like, and apparently he does this to whoever he has on the show for whatever team, but I'll just say this anyway. He was like, the one guy who I think would make sense for you is like Chris Boucher.
Yeah.
I was like, not for me, but I can see, and that's the type of category you're shopping in right now, right? It's that third string, cheap-ish contractual wise, like, you know, flawed because they're third string guys. That's the type of area you're shopping in. Now, then the question becomes, do you go Chris Boucher / Bobby Boucher /
we could get some good Waterboy content out of it.
I was
That's
just
for
thinking
sure.
of the,
that's, I mean, from a content perspective,
he wants.
We'd make that work for us. But yeah, I'm also not a big Chris Boucher guy.
No.
I just don't see it. Don't think it makes sense. But yeah, anything else you got, Adam, that you want to add before we send this off?
Next time I'll make sure that I figured out how to do all this streaming before we start, so I'm not flustered for like the first few minutes.
This is what we're doing here. We're trial and error. That's what can you say? It's
on the plus side, I got it working.
There we go. I saw the little note that it took a minute here.
Can you guys play the IST music one last time?
I mean, if it's being requested
by Greg.
Yeah, I wonder who's requesting it.
I love the headbutt. I prefer beanie.
There it is. I know. I got no beanie on. I had a beanie on earlier. Took it off. It could have been the Beanie Boys again, but that's gonna do it for this one. Let's put a bow on this here. Once again, we have a podcast out today.
Who's he dancing? Greg, who are you dancing for, man?
He's dancing for his coworkers. So quick reminder, we've got a podcast out right now, Mailbag, that Greg and I did from our Discord channel. Make sure you go sign up along with our Twitter followers. After the game tonight, Greg and I will have something for you guys. And then on the weekend, Adam and Greg will have some more stuff for you. Both of them have good breakdowns out today of that white boy stack that we reference. So go hit up their go hit up their Twitter pages, IG pages. We got all that shit everywhere. Adam, any last words here before we sign off?
I wrote a breakdown of how the Celtics flipped the script in the fourth quarter. Go check that out because your boy has asked you to. Thank you very much. CelticsBlog.com.
See what happens tonight. All right. Peace, everybody.